Hello everyone, this is Darion Gene B here, and we are back with Act 2 of my Sonic Prime rewrite. I'm going to try to keep this intro short, but I'd just like to say, and again, I've probably said this a bunch of times in other videos, that I'm really thankful that so many people enjoyed that first video. That was the first any video of mine had blown up in a while. And I thank all the people who expressed their enjoyment in the comments. And there were even people making story suggestions in certain areas where I personally messed up, and that is greatly appreciated as well. Speaking of which, in that video I did mention that I had trouble figuring out names for certain characters, like the Boss Cage versions of Cream and Vanilla, and their little Chow friends, as well as the Pirate Chaotix and such. And I was surprised to see so many people's suggestions in the comments, and what a lot of y'all came up with was pretty freaking creative. Too creative for me to not utilize in some way. I want to reiterate that I do love a lot of what you guys suggested, but I think for the remainder of this rewrite, I'm going to be referring to the Boss Cage versions of Cream and Vanilla as Ivy and Pitch. And for the Pirate Chaotix, I'll be referring to them as the Vicious Captain Croc, aka Captain Vicious, his first mate Eavesdrop, and their little comrade Balmy C. Shout out to all of these folks for the name suggestions. You'll probably see them on screen. I didn't see anybody suggest names for the Chow, so I think for the remainder of this rewrite, or at least until I eventually come up with something, I'll keep on referring to them as Cheese and Chicola. And before we jump right back into the rewrite, I just want to say this again as a brief reminder for the people in the back, that this rewrite is how I personally would have handled the show, and how I personally would have chosen to do things. Feel free to disagree with something I do in this story, and like I said last time, I highly encourage anyone to make a rewrite of this show, if mine isn't really to your exact liking. At the end of the day, I'm not a professional writer, and I'm not trying to claim or make the impression that I can create a better story than any of the people who worked on the show. All this really is just a random motherfucker putting a different spin on a Sonic story he wasn't too satisfied with. And I'll also say as another brief reminder that another context that this rewrite is being told from is that everything from Sonic 1 to Shadow 05 did happen. It's just not exactly one-to-one like it is in the games. Okay, I think with all that said and done, let us jump into episode 6 of my Sonic Prime rewrite. The episode begins with a narration from none other than Shadow the Hedgehog. We follow him as he speeds across an indistinct city. He explains how he's Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form, created with immense chaotic power. As he describes this, I'd again go with the pixel art aesthetic, showcasing Shadow's life, showing his time on the Ark with Gerald and Maria, although I would intentionally avoid alluding to anything having to do with Gerald or Maria's deaths, and I'll explain why later. Shadow goes on to express how he doesn't have what most would consider friends. However, there does lie a select few that prove to be trustworthy when truly necessary. But he continues on to explain how, as of late, he's been repeatedly called into action to prevent the world from succumbing to a catastrophic fate. And it was within the heart of all these near catastrophes his true goal became clear. He must rid the world of beings who use immense power for nonsensical destruction. And it's a goal he intends to complete no matter whatever or whoever stands in his way. The following sequence plays out with no dialogue, as Shadow is halted by a swarm of gun agents and robots. He begins to turn around, but the soldiers beg and plead for him to look at something on a monitor. Shadow, visibly annoyed, looks, and we quickly transition to him and Rouge on a gun helicopter, fast approaching South Island. Rouge throws a wing Shadow's way before the two jump off and race through Green Hill Zone, with Sonic and Company's battle with Eggman being visible in the background. We then transition to where we left off last episode, with Sonic and Shadow duking it out. Sonic slams against the crystal shard. As he opens his eyes, he immediately sees Shadow flying at him, ready with another attack. He quickly dodges and immediately retaliates with a homing attack. Sonic then jumps and sends out a Sonic Wave to push Shadow back further. Shadow probably fires some Chaos Spears at Sonic, with Sonic trying to homing attack the various crystals to send at Shadow. The fight goes on for a bit, showcasing the two being pretty evenly matched and resourceful, until Shadow pins Sonic down under his shoe. He says,
"I'm stuck in here, and it's all your fault, Sonic!"
Sonic aggressively shoves Shadow's foot off of him and asks what his problem is and what he's even talking about. Shadow frustratingly throws a punch at Sonic that he narrowly avoids as it dents a crystal shard floating by him. The two stop for a moment before Shadow explains how Sonic shattering the prism effectively shattered their home reality. He lays into Sonic about destroying their home. Sonic is taken aback by the news, before quickly pulling himself together, turning to Shadow and telling him that he's going to fix this. Shadow tells him that if he wants to know how, he should follow him. As Shadow shoots off, Sonic is hesitant to follow, thinking about the folks back in New York, but quickly goes in pursuit of Shadow. He asks Shadow how he didn't end up shattered like everything else. With this, we transition to Shadow's point of view of the Shatter event. The sequence plays out about the same as the base show, with Shadow attempting to use Chaos Control to stop Sonic, inadvertently allowing him to avoid being shattered like everything else. But after a certain point, I'd have Shadow narrating some of what he's been up to over the past 2 weeks, observing Sonic and the various shatter spaces. He's never been able to enter these various gates, but when Sonic speeds up, it opens a portal through them that he's able to see through. Sonic then asks about the Chaos Emerald, in which Shadow tells him it was lost to the void. He points downward as Sonic realizes the eternal pit of darkness far below them. Shadow explains the first time he tried to enter the gate after Sonic, he was forced back and the emerald fell below. Sonic acknowledges how useful the gem would have been, but he shrugs it off as he's confident they'll manage well enough without it. They pass by the individual shatter spaces until they reach a yellow gate that Sonic has yet to visit. Shadow explains how he spent most of his time here, as it's the only gate that allows him to pass through. The two hedgehogs enter and land in the Green Hill Zone. Sonic is at first excited that he found his home, but quickly takes notice of the surroundings. The sky, the grass, the trees, it all just looks like a ghost of the original. He hears familiar voices in the distance and immediately runs towards them, with Shadow passing a foreboding look in Sonic's direction. Sonic roams around Green Hill before he's met with the people he's been looking for in the distance. Tails, Amy, Knuckles, and even Rouge, all in one spot. His eyes light up as he sees all of them, but as he runs closer, his excitement turns to confusion. He sees them all in these ghostly forms, repeating the phrases,
"As long as I'm around, you'll always have a wingman."
The forest is the most beautiful place on Earth.
I don't need the details. Just tell me who to smash.
You may not like the way I do things, but I get things done.
Sonic, left frozen, asks what's wrong with them. Then Shadow responds with the line,
It's a shatter space, Sonic, just like the others. A cruel version to make us suffer.
but I would make the deliberate choice of having Shadow pass a glance at Rouge as he's saying this.
It's a shatter space, Sonic, just like the others. A cruel version to make us suffer.
Sonic takes all of this in and his hands begin to shake. Up to this point, it had just been another fun adventure for him. Yeah, the stakes had been fairly dire with the New Yoke stuff, but not seeming like anything he couldn't make his way through, like any other romp he'd had with Eggman or whatever foes he's faced in the past. But now Sonic is seeing the full grasp of what shattering the prism did. Sonic, after a brief moment, turns and asks Shadow how they can fix this. They then venture to the cave with the Paradox Prism blueprint thingy. Shadow runs his theory by Sonic about getting all the shards together, and hopefully being able to reform their world. Sonic thinks for a moment and remembers 9 being taken by the Chaos Council. Sonic then suggests that they save 9, stop the Council, and see if the 3 of them can fix reality. But Shadow detests the idea, lamenting how he thinks 9 isn't trustworthy. Sonic expresses that he knows the kid's rough around the edges, but he knows he's got a good heart. Shadow confesses that he saw what he did in New Yoke. When Sonic first shot out of the warp gate going to the boss cage maze, he was able to briefly peer into the New Yoke dimension through the mini rift left behind by Sonic. In it, he saw 9 take the shard and slip away. Shadow says Sonic can't trust him. Sonic dismisses Shadow's concerns and says that 9 had a rough past, one that led to him doing some not so great stuff, kinda like someone else he knows. Shadow can't help but narrow his brow at what Sonic's statement implied. Sonic says he won't give up on someone just like that, and chooses to trust 9. Shadow asks Sonic what if he's wrong about how trustworthy 9 is. Sonic simply says they'll cross that bridge if they get to it. There's no point in worrying about something that hasn't happened. Shadow simply scoffs at Sonic's response. He turns and tells Shadow he's gonna go run and get 9. As he does, Shadow immediately charges a spin attack and slams Sonic into a wall. Sonic, while staggered, asks what the heck that was for. Shadow says that he's not going to let Sonic ruin things anymore, and he'll take those regulators and get those shards his own way. Sonic chuckles and, through strained breaths, asks what'll happen to his friends when they don't want to give him up so easily. Shadow reassures Sonic that nothing will happen to them so long as they don't stand in his way. We then get the line,
"No way, Shadow! I know what you're capable of, and that's not gonna happen! So the only way you're taking my tech is over my dead."
and they engage in their duel for 9's regulators. They race all throughout Green Hill, trading blows, Shadow using his immense raw power, and Sonic keeping him on his toes with his blazing speeds. Eventually, Shadow does snag all of 9's regulators and kicks Sonic into a wall, which leads to him being knocked out and stuck under a pile of rubble. Shadow cheekily tells Sonic he'll see him back home, before he races off. After an undisclosed amount of time, Sonic wakes up and spin dashes himself out of the rubble. He frantically looks around for Shadow, only to realize he is alone. He frustratingly and determinedly tries to think of a way to get to his friends before Shadow does something reckless. Then he remembers what Shadow told him earlier. With that, he smirks, plants himself firmly, charges a super peel out, and races off. He runs ahead, but due to the loss of Nine's regulators, struggles to maintain top speed on a set path. He eventually races up a large hill and launches himself in the air. He brings himself back down at top speed and manages to escape the ghost hill. Once out, he pauses, as he doesn't have a clue as to which shatter space Shadow could have ventured to. Sonic tests his luck and heads for the closest gate, the boss cage maze. Once he enters the boss cage maze, he momentarily stops in shock. The boss cage maze he knew as a chaotic and overgrown jungle actually has more natural clearings and a thriving plant life. Just a real peaceful looking place all around. Sonic then wastes no time and races throughout the jungle, though unable to be as efficient due to the prism energy in his body. He runs further and starts to see more damage to the land. Scorched marks on the ground, several trees chopped down, all over the place. Sonic continues running with growing concerns until he sees a large figure lying unconscious on the ground. It's hangry, and next to him is his little frog friend, letting out a few concerned ribbits due to the big guy's condition. Sonic runs over to them and checks them out. Hangry is badly injured, but still very much alive. Sonic looks further in the distance and sees Thorn on the ground. He rushes towards her and tries to wake her up. She receives some injuries as well, but probably not as severe as Hangry's. Sonic tries to wake her up, but she only regains consciousness for a few seconds and meekly asks Sonic to please stop him. Sonic looks around to see any sign of Shadow, and he hears screeching in the distance. We cut to Shadow and Thorn's Birdie in a clearing, with Birdie taking a defensive stance against Shadow. Shadow assumes Birdie would be able to give him what he's after. Before he can approach Birdie any further, Sonic rushes him at intense speeds and pushes him deeper into the jungle. Sonic screams at Shadow for hurting Amy. Shadow expresses how he didn't hurt Amy, and besides, he warns Sonic that nothing would happen if they didn't get in his way. Sonic dismisses Shadow's comment and tells him he's done messing around, and he won't let him hurt any more of his friends. Shadow tells him that Sonic is in no condition to fight, and turns to go out and find Birdie again. But Sonic then says it means he should be simple enough to take out for a so-called ultimate life form. Shadow smirks and immediately rushes Sonic with a punch. Sonic blocks the attack, and the two again have a brief tussle throughout the jungle. Sonic puts up a good fight for most of it, but it's clear that Shadow wasn't lying. With the prism energy throwing his motion out of whack, he's not able to keep up with or counter Shadow's attacks as efficiently. However, that doesn't mean he'll go down easy. The fight eventually reaches a point where Sonic bum rushes Shadow at as high of a speed as he can muster. He drags Shadow through the forest, slamming him into passing trees so as to not give him enough time to recuperate. Eventually, Sonic finds a clear path and with all his might pushes to reach top speed. A familiar glow slowly but surely encompasses the two hedgehogs, and eventually the two are shot out of the boss cage maze. Sonic lands on a floating crystal below, while Shadow gathers himself in the air. With seething anger, Shadow screams, "I refuse to let you stand in my way any longer!" With that, he takes off all 4 of his limiter rings and says, "Chaos Spear!" And he lets out a wave of Chaos Spears directly at Sonic. Sonic is momentarily frozen, before quickly trying to run clear of the blasts. We see him narrowly avoid a few of them, before being completely engulfed in the fray, unable to be seen. We cut back to Shadow still firing off blasts, but eventually he stops and slowly lowers himself on a floating crystal. As he lands, he quickly falls to his knees and breathes heavily from exhaustion. We get a few seconds of Shadow with slow and heavy breaths, but he then hears quick pitter-patters fastly approaching him. It's a mildly injured and scuffed up Sonic. That was a close one. Shadow shows a frustrated grimace but lowers his head and continues breathing heavily. Sonic looks to Shadow's side and sees his limiter rings beside him. He cheekily comments, "Wow, I should be honored. You only take those off when things get real serious." Shadow simply tells Sonic to stop talking, but the blue hedgehog continues. Sonic says that they both want the same thing, to get their world back, but they won't get it back if they're stuck trying to kill each other the whole time. Shadow continues to breathe heavily. Sonic mentions how they've worked well together before, and managed to do some incredible stuff together. Sonic then asks him what's another world-saving adventure between two hedgehogs. Shadow finally gets himself up on his feet and snaps his limiter rings back on, but before he can respond, the two hear a large boom. They look over at the New Yoke Gate and see 2 large Chaos Council carriers exiting the gates, and they're slowly headed towards the boss cage and the No Place gates. Sonic is confused on how they figured out how to leave their world, but quickly remembers the last thing he saw of 9 was him being captured by the Council. He frantically turns and asks Shadow to hurry up, but before he can finish his sentence, 2 regulators get tossed at him. Shadow says he'll need to keep a hold of 2 out of the 4 regulators if he'll want to pass through the gates. Sonic eagerly puts his regulators on his shoes, and the 2 come up with a game plan. Sonic will head to the boss cage, and Shadow will venture to the No Place. They'll each get the respective shards and reconvene back at the Ghost Hill. Sonic then suggests that they'll have to think of a way to save 9. Shadow again protests, but Sonic says they have little choice, seeing as 9 is the only other person smart enough to know how to handle the shards. Shadow scoffs and asks Sonic if he'll be able to manage without being at full strength. Sonic cockily asks if Shadow really knows who he's talking to. And then Sonic asks Shadow if he'll be able to manage not being at full strength, considering it looked like that last attack took a lot out of him. Shadow, matching Sonic's energy, then asks if he really knows who he's talking to. The two begin to embark on their separate journeys, but Sonic quickly gives Shadow a warning. He warns Shadow to play nice with those guys in the boss cage. Fuck! He warns Shadow to play nice with those guys in the no place, because if he finds out he didn't, the council won't be the only thing he'll need to worry about. Shadow simply says he'll do what he has to, and how he can only encourage Sonic to do the same. Shadow then races towards the no place gate. Sonic, momentarily paused by Shadow's words, then races back up to the boss cage maze. The two hedgehogs enter the respective gates, with the two council ships slowly approaching behind them, bringing episode 6 to a close. And so we can see I've made a pretty large pivot from the OG show by having Shadow play a more consistent role. The first thing I kind of want to go over is Shadow's life. I kind of brushed through all the stuff with Gerald and Maria. I did want to at least showcase them as they are a pretty important part of Shadow's life, but I didn't really want to do too much in regards to describing or going into their deaths. And the reason for that is, to be truly honest, it felt a bit too easy. I feel like it'd just be too easy for me to boil Shadow's motivations down to just being about Maria and her promise. Again, this rewrite is happening post Black Arms incident, so he does remember her and he still very much loves her. But going into this story, I didn't really want his story to revolve around her or his past all that much in general. And with Shadow Gens in movie 3 coming out, I just personally think it'd be a little redundant for myself to kind of retread that same formula for my own personal rewrite of this little Sonic Prime story. I instead wanted to do something slightly different and utilize another aspect of Shadow's life for his motivations instead. One way I wanted to showcase this was the usage of Team Dark. When using Team Dark, I wanted to illustrate that these guys aren't typical friends per se, but do have a strong connection to each other, as you can probably tell from the little change-up scene I did earlier. And there will be smaller moments sprinkled like that throughout the rewrite. As much as I enjoyed Shadow in the OG show, I did have a couple of gripes with him, as I said in my Act 1 video, one of which being that I feel like he was a bit too held back in his more darker and ruthless nature. When watching the show when it originally released, I felt like it was kind of a missed opportunity to have Shadow play a more antagonistic role than he has in the past couple of years. And I really hope I properly illustrated that with Shadow's attack on the scavengers. I just think it's really cool to utilize Shadow as an antagonistic force that Sonic and the others occasionally have to deal with. It's an element of Shadow's character that I think hasn't been properly utilized in a while, at least to my immediate recollection. The last time I think we got something like that was, I think, like maybe Sonic Boom, and funnily enough, it was one of the reasons why I didn't particularly mind that version of Shadow. I didn't really talk about Sonic much in this section. I do, however, kind of just want to note this as like a bit of a turning point in Sonic's story, and the episode where he picks up a subtle characteristic that will become more prevalent as we move along. Alright, and with all that said, let us move on to episode 7. The episode opens on a shot of Angel Island. As we pan closer, we see Sonic and Knuckles in the middle of a sparring match, with Amy and Tails off to the side keeping score. Both Amy and Tails are cheering on Knuckles, to which Tails asks Amy about. She tells him that Sonic's on the chopping block for skipping out on a date they planned. Tails can't help but let out a little chuckle as Amy tells Knucks to whack him good. Knuckles jokes about the crowd being in his favor and suggests Sonic to back down. Crowd or no crowd, Sonic says he can take whatever Knuckles can dish out, and he tells Knuckles to bring it with all he's got. Time passes as the two are still going at it, with Tails recounting a few adventures he and Sonic went on. Knuckles overhearing comments and berates Sonic for the reckless acts he took. Sonic treats it like no big deal and suggests Knuckles tag along on some more adventures if he's so worried. The conversation veers over to Knuckles' role as guardian of the Master Emerald, and it gets slightly heated as Sonic comments on Knucks having way more fun whenever he's not cooped up guarding the big rock. As he finishes his statement, a fist collides with the ground, leaving a mini crater where Sonic stood. He moved out of the way, but the impact definitely caught all of them off guard. With audible frustration in his voice, Knuckles tells Sonic not everyone has the luxury to leave and do as they please whenever they want. Some people have responsibilities. Sonic is apologetic as he didn't mean to tick the big guy off. Knuckles thanks Amy for getting this little hangout together, but encourages the others to be on their way, as he walks towards the Master Emerald Shrine. The scene cuts to Sonic, Tails, and Amy, leaving Angel Island on the tornado, with the latter two expressing concern over Knuckles' mini outburst. Sonic tries to reassure them that he'll move past it, and he looks down towards the Emerald Shrine, and makes a comment about how if he doesn't move past it, they'll make it up to him eventually. The flashback ends, and we transition to Sonic landing in the boss cage maze. He lands with nothing but a look of sheer determination before he zooms off into the jungle, whispering to himself, "Don't worry guys, we're gonna fix this." He runs through the forest until he runs into Birdie, Thorn, Hangry, and Froggy, trying to mend their respective wounds. Sonic checks to see how they're all doing, but as he gets closer to Birdie, he notices his shoes begin to glow a bit. Thorn tells him they'll be fine, but she doesn't know where the rabbits and the Chow ran off to, and she's worried that Guy might have gotten to him. With that, Sonic races deeper into the jungle. He keeps roaming around various trees and clearings until he sees Cheese and Chocola lying unconscious near a tree. As Sonic carefully picks them up, they awake and let out a few weak Chow noises. Sonic tells the two they're going to be fine, and that they just have to find the rabbits. He races deeper into the jungle whilst cradling the two Chow. He runs for a few brief moments until he's surprised by Ivy, flying out of a few shrubs. They almost crash into each other, but Sonic manages to dodge in time. She turns around and shows excitement when she sees Sonic's return, but her focus quickly shifts to her two Chow friends as she goes to comfort them. From the shrubs, we can hear someone shouting. Out comes Pitch, who begs for her daughter to come back, but she shows relief at the sight of Sonic. Her relief quickly turns to worry as she spots Cheese and Chocola. She takes a look at them and can determine they'll be fine in due time. With that, Sonic tells them they have to hurry and make it back to Thorn, and that there isn't much time. As they race through the boss cage, Sonic asks the rabbits what happened since his departure. In a flashback, Pitch explains that after he raced off, Thorn found the shard but didn't know where Sonic was. She and Birdie spent some time searching before giving it up. The boss cage gang then set out on what they wanted to do with the shard, restoring the boss cage into a pleasant and thriving ecosystem, and not the chaotic state it was in before. They had spent the past few weeks utilizing the shard to help the Green, but it all changed when he arrived. The Black Hedgehog came and told them he'd be taking the shard. Thorn protested, but the Hedgehog approached her anyway. Thorn goes on the offense, proclaiming that nobody will take the heart of the jungle, and attempts to strike Shadow by slamming her hammer on the ground and sending a spike towards him. Shadow Chaos snaps out of the way and quickly snaps behind Thorn. Before she can react, Shadow delivers a powerful punch that sends Thorn flying, smashing through a tree as she shoots deeper into the jungle. You hear Birdie screech as Shadow looks and sees Thorn's hammer flying in the air with the shard still attached to it. He's about to zip over and get it, but he stops as a shadow looms over his head. He turns around and sees Hangry hovering over him, attempting to crush Shadow with a belly slam. Shadow spin dashes out of the way and zips back to Hangry, grabbing him and spinning him around until he tosses him into a tree. Shadow then leaps and launches a few Chaos Spears at Hangry. They land with the blast sending the big guy through some more trees, knocking him out cold. Shadow looks and sees he's all alone, with the rabbits and the Chow nowhere in sight. He then races off. Sonic asks where they ran and if they knew what happened to Cheese and Chocola. Pitch goes on to explain that during the skirmish, she grabbed Ivy along with the Chow and sprinted into the jungle. They moved as stealthily as they could between shrubs, but they'd routinely get cut off by Shadow zipping around. At some point, he stops a few feet away from a bush the gang were hiding in. The Chow took it upon themselves to attack Shadow and give the rabbits time to escape. They shoot out of the bushes and swarm Shadow, attempting to strike him as they zip around. But Shadow quickly grabs the two with one hand and aggressively slams them against a tree. Pitch tries to cover Ivy's mouth as she cries out to her little friends, which gains Shadow's attention. Shadow slowly begins approaching the bush, and we see the rabbits quiver in fear. He keeps approaching until he hears Birdie screeching in the distance, and he quickly gives chase. After he ran off, Pitch struggled to get Ivy away from the location as she tried to find somewhere safe to lay low. We transition back with Ivy showing frustration and regret for being unable to help her loved ones. Sonic attempts to cheer her up, but tells them they have bigger things to worry about. We transition to the council ship heading for the boss cage maze, with Eggman, Rusty, and Nine all aboard. Eggman makes comments on the power of the shard being far greater than he once thought, and this discovery is all thanks to Nine. Nine attempts to sass the Doctor, but he pays him no mind. With the prospect of other worlds being under the council's control, he menacingly grins as they approach the boss cage maze. The Doctor then turns his attention to Nine and tosses out the gracious offer of having Nine work under the council, since he's the reason they made this brilliant discovery. Nine immediately declines and says something about not helping the people who took his home and friends. Eggman sees right through Nine's words and brings up him abandoning the rebels. It had been weeks before Nine made his return, but once he did, he immediately swooped back off with that annoying blue rat and paid no mind to anybody else. And he only joined the fight after he and Sonic returned once again. It seems to Eggman the only thing Nine cares about is supporting his favorite blue gerbil. Nine detests and goes on about how Sonic is reckless, impatient, doesn't care about what anyone says or thinks, and helps and cares about people who should mean nothing to him. Nine tries to say this with a tone of irritation to mask his thoughts from the Doctor. The doctor shows a look of focus as he takes in Nine's words. Then he asks why he really came back, which stumps Nine. Before he can respond, Eggman cuts him off and tells him it doesn't matter, and that they're sure to meet the Hedgehog soon enough, to which Nine is caught off guard by. We cut back to Sonic and the Scavengers, with Thorn being furious at Sonic for what he just asked of them. Thorn, not fully recovered, raises her hammer towards Sonic and tells him nobody under any circumstances is going to remove the shard from this jungle. Sonic tells her that he needs it to save his world and his friends, and that he has no other option. Things get tense as Thorn brings up Shadow trying to take the shard, then Sonic, and now he's warning them about more people bringing trouble to the jungle. Sonic knows it's really complicated, but says it'd be better off with him because after he's fixed his world, he'll bring it right back. Thorn still strongly and intensely protests, even in a weaker state. The others try to calm Thorn down as Sonic asks where the shard even is. She simply tells all of them that it's hidden, and that's how it's going to stay until all of you troublemakers leave. Sonic then says if that's the case, they at least need to deal with the people coming for the shard. He tells them that they've got things and creatures unlike anything they've seen before. Sonic suggests everyone retreat from the area and take the shard as far away as possible. Ivy interjects and says she wants to help Sonic. Pitch immediately shuts down the idea, but Ivy goes on about how scared she was when Shadow attacked, and the worst part of it being how she couldn't help her friends when they were hurt. She doesn't want someone else to get hurt when she could have helped them. Thorn chimes in and tells Sonic that she won't let anyone get the shard, but she also won't sit by and watch someone destroy the jungle. Henry steps up and says he'll do anything to protect his friends, with Froggy and the Chow backing him up. Sonic smiles when seeing them band together. Pitch, noticing she's more than outvoted, then suggests an idea. That her, Ivy, Sonic, and the Chow take the front lines, while the ones still recovering hold back and make sure the shard isn't discovered. Almost on cue, the group hears a large boom, and a council ship shoots out of a portal from the sky. With that, Birdie, Hangry, and Thorn fall back, while Sonic and the others race across the jungle. Up on the council ship, Eggman, climbing into his mech, commands Rusty alongside the Egg Forcers and a few Egg Drones to scour the jungle for the shard. He looks over and sees Nine interacting with an interface. He then tosses Nine in a cell before following his subordinates off the ship. Unbeknownst to him, however, Nine had a mini device he was linking to the council's interface. As Eggman walks away, Nine quickly gets to work on his device and tries to find a way to hack the lock on his cell. Sonic and the others race through the jungle, and they see the council's Egg Forcers flying up ahead. Sonic asks them if they're ready, and with their reassurance, he tells them to move fast, trip up the bots as best as they can, and he'll land the finishing blow. With that, they charge. Sonic homing attacking a row of Egg Forces approaching them, with the Rabbits and Chow following suit. Ivy and Pitch both send out their Chow companions to blitz and disorient a few Egg Forcers, with the two soaring through the air and knocking them down, just in time for Sonic to blitz them. The fight continues on as they race closer towards the council ship. Elsewhere in the jungle, Rusty is seen examining a particular area along with some Egg Drones. One of the drones then finds the tree the shard was originally buried in. The drones scan it and detect shard energy. It then coordinates a signal to the surrounding drones and even Rusty to begin scanning for the shard's energy signature. Rusty then runs deeper into the jungle and attempts to scan her surroundings as she ventures. As she's running, she picks up some shard energy, a couple hundred yards away. Before she can head further towards it, a hammer smashes her in the head, sending her flying into a tree. Thorn stands before her, shortly followed by Hangry exiting out of a bush. Thorn begins to tell the intruder they are unwelcome, but she's stopped once Rusty comes to and they lock eyes. Hangry is frozen, not knowing what to make of whatever it is he's looking at. The roses are both frozen, with Rusty's head and eye twitching and glitching out, until she regains focus, gets back up on her feet, and tells the two they, along with this jungle, will be nothing but a landmark in the Chaos Council's Shatterversal takeover, and it'd be smart for them to surrender. Thorn stands her ground, ready to attack, while Hangry asks Rusty what she even is. Rusty tells them she's a highly evolved form of life, and with the power of all the shards, the Council shall share this evolutionary gift and so much more. With that, Hangry and Thorn ready themselves. Still recovering from Shadow's attack, they still stand defensively against Rusty. The three then charge into battle. At the same time, back at the Council ship, Nine managed to hack his way out of his cell, and tries to hack into the Council's main interface. He's having trouble, however, as he needs special access. With no luck, he sneaks around the ship and hopes to find some piece of tech or equipment that can allow him to help Sonic. He eventually finds these weird-looking goggles that seem connected to these other weird-looking devices. He tries them on and lets out a little excited chuckle as he sees it's a system to remotely control the Council's machines. We transition back with Sonic and the gang, still dealing with the Egg Forcers as they make their way closer to the Council ship. Sonic praises everyone for how great they've been doing. As they race forward, he looks over at the council ship and sees Eggman. He then tells the rabbits and the Chow that if they take out the big guy, handling the rest of these bots should be a piece of cake. They continue running until an Egg Forcer lands in their way. Sonic tells the gang he'll handle this one. He boosts towards it, and a faint, "Sonic?" the voice of Nine, comes out from the bot. He stops and is relieved to hear the voice of his little buddy. He asks him if he's okay and what happened to him. He explains how he got himself captured to try and take out the council from within. He thought that maybe there could have been a way for him to hack their tech. He underestimated their ability to copy his shard data though. Sonic tells him not to worry about it and that it's not over yet. Nine asks Sonic if he knows where the shard is. Sonic confesses he has an idea, to which the rabbits are shocked. Pitch tells Sonic it sounded like Thorn was pretty insistent she hid it in a well enough spot. Sonic tells her that he's pretty confident she did, and hopes she can keep it safe until they deal with that egghead. Nine, controlling the Egg Forcer, reaches for Sonic's hand and is confused as to where the other regulators are. Sonic tells him he lent them to someone who can help. The group then ventures even further towards the council ship. As it seems they are about to approach it, an explosion catches them off guard and sends them all flying into various directions. A voice echoes out. It's Eggman, proclaiming to all who can hear that their world is soon to be taken over by the council. Sonic gets up and blitzes around to get everyone out of the area. Eggman then continues to carpet bomb the surrounding area, which can be heard by Thorn, Hangry, and Rusty. The three are caught off guard with hearing the explosions. Rusty eventually gets the upper hand. She leaps into the air, ready to deliver a powerful punch to Thorn and Hangry. Before she can land it, she is hoisted high into the air and harshly thrown upward. It's Birdie, and as she goes to try and comfort the two, Thorn is extremely angry as she told her to stay hidden. Rusty lands almost perfectly on the ground, and her eyes light up as her scanners read the shard energy is coming from Birdie. Rusty alerts the doctor on a communicator that she has located the shard and is about to retrieve it. Over the communicator, Eggman tells her excellent work. Back with Sonic and the gang, they take cover while Eggman continues bombing the surrounding area. Sonic is visibly pissed off, asks Ivy to hold on to Nine, and rushes through the explosions. Nine calls out for him to wait, to no avail as he already zoomed off. He then asks Ivy if she can take him to wherever the shard is. Ivy says that Sonic might need their help. With frustration in his voice, Nine tells her all they do is just get in the way, and that they need to find the shard. Pitch grabs her daughter and tells her that Sonic will be fine, and that they have to make sure Hangry and Miss Rose are okay. Ivy then agrees, and the group race off, leaving Sonic to deal with Eggman. He zips, flips, and tricks around the various explosives, until he reaches Eggman, in time to see him communicating with who appears to be Dr. Deep, with Eggman telling Deep that Rusty is sure to acquire the Boss Cage shard. Deep says they have acquired their respective shard as well. He's cut off as Deep's communication cuts to nothing but static, much to Eggman's annoyance and confusion. Sonic is stumped for a second, thinking about Shadow, as well as the other no-place pirates. He quickly regains focus, however, and calls out to Eggman. Eggman, spotting Sonic, ceases the bombing. At first, Eggman makes a snide remark towards Sonic's injuries, to which Sonic says the doc's just bitter he tussled with someone that left this kind of mark. Sonic and Eggman have a brief moment where they challenge each other's worldview a bit, with Eggman going on about how these worlds will benefit from their mechanical regime, much like that rock of an island back home. And Sonic expresses annoyance with the prospect of someone lording over him while he's roaming around these various worlds. On the bright side though, it means he gets to have fun knocking these eggheads' lights out. Eggman says he'll enjoy wiping that smirk off Sonic's face, and the two engage in battle, with Eggman firing off his itinerary of missiles and lasers, and Sonic swiftly dodging and avoiding them, playing defense by popping an insta-shield or two. The brawl between the two is intense, but it quickly breaks out into a chase through the jungle, with Eggman pursuing Sonic. We then meet back up with Nine and the gang. Pitch remarks how there don't seem to be as many of those creatures roaming around. Nine gives a "you're welcome" as he's been transmitting a signal that wards off the other Egg Forcers. The gang then run into Thorn, Birdie, and Hangry, still engaged in their fight with Rusty, the latter of which seen being knocked on the ground. The rabbits help Hangry on his feet, while shown to be horrified by the appearance of Rusty. They ask what she is, and why she looks like Miss Rose. Rusty stands before them, however, ready to take them all on. Nine quickly begins trying to hack into Rusty again. She begins twitching and glitching out. Nine gives a smug and confident smirk, before he realizes his equipment is starting to glitch out as well. Whether or not this equipment was designed to interact with Rusty's systems, or her model just predates it, Nine isn't sure. Either way, the hacking isn't working. Eventually, the headset short-circuits out. Nine tries to get the setup back up online, but it's not working, and he hurries to try to fix it. Thorn tells them that all they need to do is make sure this thing doesn't get to Birdie. Rusty quickly pulls herself together and rushes the scavengers, which proves to be a bit more challenging than she previously predicted. For a bit, Rusty is on the ropes, but things eventually balance out. While she can't defeat all of them, she can surely hold her own, especially if she only means to acquire the shard. Thorn tells Rusty that they won't let a soulless creature like her hurt their jungle. In a dry tone, she tells them she wouldn't quite say soulless. She opens her chest hatch to reveal a weak little flicky powering her, much to everyone's shock and horror, especially Thorn and Birdie. Just then, Sonic shoots out of the tree line, still fighting with Eggman. He cockily asks if that's all he's got, before his attention is quickly brought to Rusty and the gang. Sonic is only left frozen when seeing Rusty, and the little flicky caged within her, frozen enough for Eggman to appear from the trees and notice. He flips up the headpiece on his mech so as the others can hear him more clearly. He grins and goes on about how remarkable she is, and that Sonic has seen the other test subjects, and he expresses how he's unsure if the hedgehog's tenacity is what makes her compatible with their design, or the flicky that powers her, giving her that extra push. Sonic, with growing anger, asks who she was before this. Rusty closes the hatch as Eggman says they gave her enhanced abilities, optimum processing power, and a life of true purpose, to aid the Council in sharing their genius with all who they see fit. Sonic tells Eggman he won't be doing any of that while he's still breathing, and homing attacks up to his head. Eggman flips the mech's head back down in time to block Sonic's attack. He knocks him away and calls all Egg Forcers to his location. Sonic tells Thorn and Birdie to get out of there. As Birdie tries to take off, Rusty grabs her and slams the two on the ground, ensuring they won't be going anywhere so easily. But she's hit with a spin attack from Ivy, and then surrounded by the other scavengers. Up next is the big final bout of the episode for the shard. Egg Forcers close in as Sonic and Eggman, as well as Rusty and the scavengers, go at it. Sonic, seeing them close in, chooses to use his speed to even the odds, bouncing between Eggman and knocking as many Egg Forcers out, so the scavengers have less trouble with Rusty. Eventually, 9 gets the goggles back online and takes control of a random Egg Forcer in the battle. He sees the chaos unfolding and comes up with an idea. He begins taking out a handful of Egg Forcers in the midst of the chaos, and carries a few parts out of sight from the rest of the group. Eventually, Rusty has had enough, and once she finds an opening, punches Birdie in the gut with all her might, forcing her to hack up the shard. Thorn attempts to comfort Birdie as she reels in pain. The shard flies through the air. Sonic looks up and sees the shard, runs up a tree and grabs a leaf, spins over and nabs the shard, wrapping it up in the leaf so he doesn't teleport away mid-fight. Once he lands on the ground, Eggman screams for his subordinates to get that hedgehog. Sonic passes a glance to Thorn and Birdie. Thorn screams for him to go. Sonic pops a smirk and then boosts through the boss cage, with Eggman and his army giving chase. The chase goes on for a bit, until almost out of nowhere, a random Egg Forcer shoots out and grabs Sonic, taking him up into the sky. Eggman and the others continue chasing, with Eggman showing immense confusion. Sonic struggles for a second before 9 tells him that it's him, and he hands him a bomb that seems to be made out of Egg Forcer parts. Sonic lights up and says once he's taken these guys out, the two of them can make a break for it out of here. 9 tells him not to bother, as he can probably get more work done from the inside. 9 tells him he already got some good data from hacking the lock on his cell and this goggle setup. As he explains this, he takes one of Sonic's regulators and begins to try and configure it so they can communicate once Sonic has the full set. Eggman from inside his mech zooms in and sees this, clicking together what's happening, and stops and stares at the council ship. "You think you're clever, don't you?" He pulls up a hollow interface and starts typing something. Right as 9 is done working on the regulator, the floating council ship viciously turns, sending an unexpected 9 flying into a wall. The Egg Forcer begins to glitch out. Sonic calls out to 9, but realizes that the Egg Forcer is back in control. He then kicks it away and begins falling downwards towards the horde of Egg Forcers behind him. He spins and throws the bomb, blowing all of the Egg Forcers away. He lands on the ground and does a victory dance with the boss cage shard, but is quickly shot down by a huge laser. As Sonic gets blasted away, the shard flies through the air, with Eggman catching it. Eggman flips his mech's headpiece up again as Rusty extends her arms to grab onto it. He tells Sonic on second thought maybe destroying him wouldn't be as satisfying, that maybe continuing the Cybermobian project with him could be better, teach him to really fall in line. He even callously throws out how he and Rusty could make a cute pair. They both then fly off to the council ship, with Sonic struggling to get back up from the blast. As Eggman enters the ship and prepares to leave, Ivy and Mud appear and grab onto Sonic, bringing him up into the air. He looks up at them and sees them with tearful eyes as they look at their destroyed home. He looks over at the ruined boss cage maze, as Ivy tells him they worked so hard only for these mean people to ruin it, with Mud sharing the same sentiment. Sonic looks over towards a somber-looking Thorn, with an image of Amy momentarily flashing in his head as he sees her. Sonic tells Ivy and Mud that he will fix this. All of this. The council ship enters the portal, and Ivy spins Sonic around and tosses Sonic in after it, bringing the episode to a close. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this section ran on for like a bit longer than I initially intended. I know in my first video I said these theoretical episodes would be around like 20 something minutes. I never expected one of these sections in the actual videos to meet that length. I'm definitely gonna try my damnedest to like condense a lot of this shit going forward, primarily for my sake, I am not even gonna lie to you. One aspect of the original show that kind of contributed to its monotonous way it decided to tell its story was the constant hopping back and forth between the various shatter spaces they established. I don't really mind that particular aspect for this multiverse type of story, but when we're venturing back to these same locations numerous times, without that many differences, it just kind of feels a little bland. So one way I wanted to remedy this in this story is to like add more new and interesting things to the worlds of these Shatterverses when we come back to them. A reminder, this Shatterversal adventure in this rewrite is taking place over the course of several weeks. It's been weeks since Sonic last saw the Boss Cage gang, and as such, when he got back, I wanted there to be at least some bit of a different vibe, which is kind of why for the sake of this story, I would have presented it more as like a bright and like colorful area to contrast the really dark and moody vibe we got the last time we saw them. And I really hope my editing style kind of illustrated that. Think of it as like a Sonic Prime Encore mode in a sense. There really isn't that much extra characterization I felt like I needed to add to the scavengers. The most I did was kind of like just put more focus on Ivy this time around. Also in the middle of recording that little bit there, I just randomly came up with the idea to just call the Chow Mud and Sap. So like, yeah, I'm going to be sticking with that for the remainder of this rewrite. Thorn and Rusty, while not focused on too extensively, I do have more plans for, and this is also where I want to clarify that this is kind of the beginning of that whole little Rose trio dynamic that they established in the original show. I thought that dynamic was pretty sweet between the three of them, although I can't exactly promise in this rewrite it'll be as sweet or fun in comparison, especially if like this is the beginning of it. This is also where I want to clarify something else I kind of messed up with in my Act 1 video. And it's that instead of having Rusty reveal to Sonic that she has the birdie inside her in the New York base back in the Act 1, I instead moved that moment here, and I wanted to specify it in that Act 1 video, but I didn't. And I can tell you exactly why. It's because I forgot. Moving that moment over into this section of the story, where the Council are becoming a more prominent and bigger threat, I think it works to kind of reinforce what kind of threat they really pose, and the stakes that are at hand. I also did it because, like, thematically speaking, it'd be too interesting for me to just not do. Like, the whole thing with Rusty and being powered up by the bird in the original show, I think they established that that really wasn't the case for some reason. It's meant to serve as, like, a darker parallel to the kind of connection that the original Prime Amy had with her bird friend, which I think in general was just supposed to, like, evoke the same kind of relationship that Amy had with the bird in SA1. So for me personally, when constructing the story for this rewrite, I felt like it would have been a missed opportunity to, like, not really play directly with that here, by having Thorn and Birdie be the ones to see that. As far as the action is concerned, considering that this is an action-adventure show, in my theoretical rewrite, I did want a lot of the action scenes to stand out and feel somewhat unique. A lot of the ways, as you can probably tell from my Act 1 video, was like taking design philosophies from like some boss encounters and gameplay mechanics from the games and incorporating them into the show in some sort of unique way. I say all of this because some of the action in this episode in particular was meant to like evoke that same vibe, like Sonic and the Scavengers running along and taking out Egg Forces was to like evoke that same kind of vibe the 2D games had. As far as Sonic's particular journey in this rewrite, I've kind of been tight-lipped about what his story exactly is in this rewrite. So far, it may not seem that different from the OG show. At most, I've kind of just tried to lean on certain things a bit more, like his relationships with his friends, how much he misses them, and the very subtle ways it's starting to get to him. For this story, I'd want there to be a kind of shift in Sonic's behavior going forward. Not a major one, but a notable one. He still confidently expresses himself and obviously has a good time whenever he's duking it out with somebody, and just doing cool shit in general. However, I do want to emphasize that not having his friends around for a while and being the direct cause of it is starting to get to him a bit. I contemplated on if I wanted that flashback section with Sonic and the gang at the beginning of this one, or if I wanted to save it for later, but I think it worked well as a means of showing what kind of headspace Sonic is in going into this next step of this big journey. Also, it's another way of showing more of the Prime Sonic universe variants, their personalities, and more of what their relationship is like amongst each other, as well as Sonic himself, which I think helps the audience buy into why Sonic cares about them as much as he does. With that out of the way, let us dive into episode 7. The episode begins with Shadow entering the no place. As he hovers over the water, he begins looking around and sees nothing. With that, he races across the seas in search of the shard. As he races, we flash back to a time before the shatter. We get a shot of Shadow looking down at Omega, battling with Eggman, with Rouge landing beside him. After a minute of ranting about how hard it was to track the two down, she asks what they're up to. Shadow explains that he managed to run into Omega as he was in the middle of investigating nearby zones that were emitting high amounts of strange energy. Omega was hunting down Eggman, and the two managed to track him down to this area, where he was planning on leveling them all to launch a new network of bases and factories for his machines, and he was going to do so using generators powered by Chaos drives. For now, Shadow's allowing Omega to have his fun. Rouge cheekily pokes fun at Shadow, claiming he's becoming more heroic protecting the zones and the people in it, almost like Sonic. Shadow corrects her and states the people aren't his priority. Just that the Doctor's endeavors to utilize this kind of power he finds to be frustratingly moronic. He then asks why she's here. Rouge explains how she was hired by a benefactor to acquire some valuable pieces of tech for a very special price. She thought no better than Dr. Eggman to steal from, and wanted to get the boys to assist her. They continue watching Omega and Eggman for a moment, until Rouge mentions that she bumped into Sonic and Tails while she was searching for them, and tells Shadow they were looking for Eggman as well, and how she doubts they're too far behind. With that, Shadow enters the fight and tells Omega he will finish things here. The Big Bop protests and claims Eggman is his to destroy. Rouge then tells them both she'll need to take some substantial parts from this mech and tells them not to get too trigger happy. Eggman, hearing all this, gets furious as they speak so openly as if he's nothing to them. He then readies himself to take on all three. As Rouge suggests, they make it a free-for-all. Shadow smirks as they all charge towards Eggman. We transition back to Shadow going through the no place. As he races across the water, he passes several large structures that are slowly seen sinking back underwater. Land masses, ancient temples, etc., all visible as he races across the seas. Shadow looks at all this curiously before he boosts even faster across the water. We transition to the No Place pirates sailing across the seas, enjoying themselves, with all sorts of treasures and jewels acquired. Dredd, Sails, and Rose sing a celebratory shanty about their victorious escapades over the past few weeks. The shanty goes over how Dredd has used the shard to bring up land masses from the seas, allowing the crew to pillage various temples, structures, and areas long consumed by the endless ocean. As the crew keeps singing, we see below deck the pirate chaotics along with Baton Rouge tied and chained underneath, with Little Balmy C singing along with the crew above, much to his crocodile captain's annoyance. We cut to Rose looking off into the distance. Sails leaves Dredd to his shanty and asks Black Rose what's the matter. She's skulking over Sonic disappearing not too long ago. She was enamored by an adventurer like him, and for him to go without a goodbye has left her more than a little disappointed. Sails tries to cheer her up by reminding her they've almost made it to his home, the Western Isle. He even mentions how big of a bounty they'll get from handing the Chaotix crew over to Captain Jack. For a moment she still sulks, before she pulls herself together, saying that no good-for-nothing hedgehog will stop her from enjoying their bounty. The two make their way back to Dredd, as we cut to the council ship entering through a portal. When we see Dr. Deep and Omega on board, they send out some drones to scan a wide radius while Omega sits out on the outside of the ship. Deep is enamored by the geography of this world, but expresses disappointment at there being not that many people around to revel in his genius. We transition back to the No Place pirates. In the middle of singing another shanty, Vicious from below deck tells him to knock it off, which sparks more bickering between him and Dredd. They go back and forth for a bit until they're interrupted by something crashing onto their ship. All three turn and see a mysterious figure. Rose catches a glimpse of their silhouette and gets ecstatic, thinking it's Sonic. She runs and wraps her arms tightly around the figure, proclaiming how she won't let him slip away so easily again. Shadow is revealed laying casually on the ground as Rose hugs him. She realizes this isn't Sonic and draws her blade, demanding to know who he is, while Sails comments on him looking pretty similar to Sonic. Dredd sternly demands to know who'd be so bold to board the Angel's voyage uninvited. Shadow tells him who he is and that he's working with Sonic. The No Place crew show visible apprehension at his comments as Shadow catches a glimpse of the shard and demands Dredd hand it to him. Dredd, with visibly growing anger, steps to Shadow and tells him he ain't getting off this ship with his beauty, and if he wants to get off the ship alive, he'd better turn tail now. Shadow tells him he needs the shard to save his world, and he's not leaving without it. Things get tense as Rose and Sails stare from afar, and we see the Chaotix crew plus Baton eagerly watching from below deck. Shadow and Dredd's standoff goes for a few brief moments, until Shadow spots the council ship flying towards them. He looks closer and his eyes widen as he sees Omega. Shadow tells Dredd to get the shard as far away from here as he can, as he races towards the ship. Dredd hesitates for a moment, before he asks Sayles how long till they reach the Western Isle. Sayles estimates they're a few hundred miles out. Dredd then tells the two of them to batten down the hatches. As they move about the ship, Rose tells the crew below deck they might want to brace themselves again, much to the crew's visible nervousness. Dredd begins to whisper to the Shard, asking for its help once again. Shadow eventually reaches the Council ship as Deep detects Shard energy coming from the distance. He sees it's nothing but a small ship and is about to have Omega go retrieve it, until he alerts them that Sonic has approached the ship. Though he quickly corrects himself and states it's another similar life form. Deep takes a look and is astonished to see another pesky hedgehog. Deep yells for Omega to go get the Shard while he deals with the hedgehog. Omega completely ignores the order and beelines for Shadow, and the two engage in battle. Deep curses Omega for his disobedience, and he goes on to say how a can opener can probably listen better than him. Back on Dredd's ship, the Shard begins to glow, and with that, a wave emerges underneath the ship and quickly pushes their ship along the water at blazing speeds. As Deep is climbing into his mech suit, his sensors detect the Shard energy quickly moving away from them, and he screams for Omega to ignore the hedgehog and go for the Shard. Omega refuses, as this hedgehog is too hazardous to their objective to be ignored by him. Shadow cheekily retorts with how he can almost say the same about Omega. The two go at it across the ocean, with Omega dealing heavy swings and extreme firepower. But due to Shadow's fight with Sonic, he's still not at full strength yet, so we don't see him using much of his Chaos abilities. He can only manage to maneuver around Omega's attacks and strike whenever available. Shadow and Omega have a back and forth similar to the one between him and Sonic, with Shadow belittling Omega, thinking he's limiting himself by being nothing but a lackey for the Doctors. Omega corrects him, however, and states he knows his worth, and he will prove it to the Doctors whether they allow him to or not. He is Omega, the elite egg forcer and the ultimate hedgehog-killing machine. Shadow makes a comment about old habits dying hard, before they continue to duke it out. By this point, the Council ship has begun chasing after the No Place crew, sending out a few egg forcers ahead of them. We cut to the Chaotix crew getting slammed around below deck, with Batten screaming up at Dredd that they wouldn't pull this stunt again. Dredd screams for her to shut her trap as he's trying to save all their hides. Sayles and Black Rose try to fire cannonballs at the Egg Forcers, while the Shard glows and shoots out blasts from the sea to knock them away. Egg Forcers continue to blast at the ship until it tips over, which sends Dredd, Sayles, and Rose flying off into the ocean. We see that the Shard has made an air bubble for them and it pushes them forward to the Western Isle. As this is happening, Shadow and Omega are continuing their brawl, with Omega noting that while the energy he detects coming from Shadow is low, it still emits a similar wavelength to that of the Shards. He says the Doctors will be disappointed to not have a chance to use him as a lab rat after he's vaporized him. They continue on with the fight until Omega launches an energy blast that knocks Shadow into the water. Omega, thinking he's victorious, chases after the Council, and we see a shot of an injured Shadow climbing out of the water. We eventually see the crew of the Angel's Voyage wash onto shore, and they check to see if they're all okay. Rose then asks about the Chaotix crew and Batten. Dredd looks somberly out to sea before he tells the two to forget about them, and they head forward through the Isle. They walk through what seems to be a sort of pirate haven, with lots of trades happening between various pirate crews and such. Dredd tells them they'll try and snag one of these other ships and hightail it out of there before the Council catch up to them. As they venture through the Isle, many others take notice of the Shard Dredd has acquired, and they get called out by Captain Jack. They exchange pleasantries, with Jack being very keen on the large gem Dredd has acquired. Sayles suggests pawning the Shard over to Jack and saving them the trouble, but Dredd sternly shuts the idea down. He'd sooner shave off his quills than hand the Shard over to anyone. They leave Jack and then start trying to move more stealthily to find a ship to steal. We cut back to the Angel's Voyage with the Chaotix and Batten still tied up below deck, all in a heated argument about their current predicament, and what led them here. Shadow lands on the ship and lets them all free. Batten darts out of the hatch as Shadow gives her a long, concentrated stare, before he tells the Chaotix crew they're going to help him get that Shard. The Chaotix protest, seeing as the rough couple of weeks they've had has them feeling less than keen on pursuing the gem any further. Shadow raises his voice and says the Shard Dredd has is one of many, and he needs to acquire all of them in order to restore his world. After that, he'll have no further use for it. He even suggests it could end up becoming theirs. Vicious and his crew begin to reconsider as they dream of the possibilities they could have with several shards. Meanwhile, Batten is seen keenly floating through the air with the prism visible in her eye. With that, the crew get ready and set sail for the Western Isle. Back on the Isle, we see the Council ship floating overhead, and various egg forces get sent out to search for the Shard, with Deep interrogating several pirates on whether they've seen a red porcupine running around with a blue gem. As this is happening, Shadow and the Chaotix crew approach the shore, and Shadow sets his sights on Omega as he's approaching the isle as well. Eavesdrop asks if Shadow has any sort of plan. Shadow simply tells them to just hurry and find the shard, while he settles a score. He then races across the sea and calls out to Omega. Omega, seeing Shadow, says nothing and immediately begins raining fire, and the two go at it once again. Jack eventually rats out Dread's crew, and they soon get spotted, with Deep cornering Dread and demanding he hand the shard over. Dread refuses and readies himself for a fight. The Chaotix then enter the fray, with Eavesdrop managing to sneak up and nab the shard from Dread, and he runs off to try and find a ship for him and his crew to escape. Deep quickly sends egg forces after him and gives chase. Dread attempts to follow, but Rose stops him and practically begs him to stay, as this is their chance to make a break for it. Dread, with fury in his voice, says he's not giving up the shard, and leaves the two behind to go after it. Eavesdrop is seen taking out a few egg forces until Dread catches up to him, which starts a brief scuffle that escalates once Deep, Vicious, and Balmy, as well as some egg forces, enter the scene. A big brawl breaks out for the shard, as we cut back to Shadow and Omega's duel. The fight seems neck and neck, with Shadow slowly gaining more of an advantage. He says to Omega that he may call himself the elite egg forcer, but he'll never be a match for the ultimate life form. With all the energy he can muster, he launches a giant chaos spear that sends Omega through some debris that leads to him being stuck under the ocean under some rubble. Once Omega's defeated, Shadow immediately races off to find the shard. In the middle of the big skirmish, Batten manages to swoop in and nab the shard. She flies off with it and manages to run into Shadow. She jokes about being better off taking the thing for herself instead of banking on Shadow getting her more shards. Shadow somewhat sarcastically tells her once he has all the shards, she's sure to get exactly what she deserves. As this happens, she's shot by a laser and the shard flies out of her hand. As Shadow catches her, Deep flies past and grabs the shard and begins to fly away with it. We then see him receive a call from Eggman in which he tells him Rusty is sure to acquire the shard. Deep tells him he's acquired the respective shard as well. They just need to, but before he finishes his sentence, Shadow uses a Chaos Snap and kicks him in the face. As he lands and catches the shard, he pauses thinking about what he just heard over Deep's call, before he begins making a break for it. Deep pushes a few buttons on a device as he screams for the egg forces to get the hedgehog. Egg forces chase after Shadow, firing lasers that he narrowly avoids. Dread as well as the Chaotix are seen blitzing past and taking out egg forces in order to get to the shard. Shadow sees the council ships slowly approaching him, and sees those chasing him and gets an idea, thinking back to what Omega said earlier about his chaos energy and that of the prism. At the last second, Shadow breaks and he raises the shard above his head and shouts, "Chaos Control!" At that moment, a giant shockwave erupts from the shard, which sends him and everyone in the surrounding area flying into various directions, all being knocked out cold. An undisclosed amount of time passes until Shadow slowly wakes up to see Dr. Deep flying back to his ship with the shard in hand. Shadow struggles to get up, and injured Batten decides to give him a hand and flies him towards the ship as it opens up a portal. Shadow asks why she's helping him, and she says she didn't almost get her wings blown off for nothing, and that he still owes her a rock. They look up and see Dread somehow clinging onto the ship's side as it goes through the portal. She then tosses him into the portal. Shadow lands in the shatter space simultaneously as Sonic exits the boss cage gate. The two meet up, and Shadow scolds Sonic for failing to get the shard, to which Sonic snaps at him as well for his botched job. Shadow says if it weren't for Sonic's bothersome friends, Sonic sternly asks if any of them are okay. Shadow reassures him that any harm that came to them didn't come from him, as he was preoccupied with Omega most of the time. The two stop their conversation and stare at the council ships. Sonic chuckles a little, seeing as now they have 3 shards all in one place, with Shadow saying it'll be like taking candy from a baby. Sonic then suggests a race to the gate. Shadow eagerly agrees, and the two have a fun, intense race through the Shatterverse, ending with Shadow making it to the gate before Sonic, and as he enters, we transition back to before the Shatter, with all of Team Dark. We see them inspecting Eggman's mech and seeing nothing inside. Omega asks Shadow if he'll continue assisting in hunting Eggman. Shadow refuses, seeing as he already accomplished what he set out to do here. He begins to leave, with Rouge taking off as well, saying to the two that it's fun palling around with them whenever she gets the chance. Omega shares the sentiment by stating how he's thankful to know those who won't quickly try to suppress his bloodthirsty tendencies. With his back turned, Shadow smirks hearing what his comrades have to say, before he races off into the distance, bringing the episode to a close. I felt it was only right to give Shadow an episode that put him in more of a spotlight, and thoroughly lay out his connection to the Prime reality with Rouge and Omega. Like I said, I'm not putting the friends label on them, but the three clearly do care for each other, albeit to a bit of a lesser extent than that of Sonic and his friends, clearly. Another issue I had with Shadow in the OG show, and I swear that's the last time I say that in this video, was kind of that he was only stuck as the straight man to Sonic's dumbassery for like most of the show. It didn't have any other varied dynamics with any other characters, which is another reason why I decided to make Rouge and Omega extra important in relation to him, as well as did little things like pair him up with the Pirate Chaotix, even if for a brief alliance. As far as the overall cast and what I have him do here, I didn't feel the need to add too much to the Chaotix or Batten, but I did plant some seeds for more things to come with Dread that I hope y'all do find somewhat interesting at least. In my Act 1 video, I think I did mention that I wanted to relate Dread's obsession with the Shard to Knuckles' connection to the Master Emerald in some way, and that very much is apparent in this episode section with how he speaks to it and whatnot. But I do want to say there is more of a connection beyond just that surface level comparison. I as well added in some more little sprinklings of Omega getting tired of the Doctor's BS, and like with the Boss Cage episode, I wanted this episode's locales and set pieces to be at least slightly different, which is why I went with the whole Western Isle thing. Plus, I think it kind of builds out the world in a pretty interesting way. Another thing I did was choosing to have Sonic and Shadow be significantly injured and fatigued from their fight going into both of these episodes. I did that so that A, it felt like the fight had some bit of consequence. You know, Sonic and Shadow both weren't at top condition for their respective journeys to get the shards, and as such, they weren't able to get them. And so we'd get more use out of the established cast, in a way that I think works pretty naturally. One thing I'll admit that I may have messed up a bit on is kind of like the timeline of both of these episodes. I thought it'd be cool to have both of these take place at the same time to, like, you know, have Sonic and Shadow both converge. I think it's pretty apparent that there is a fair bit of holes in how I structured this. Anyway, I think that's all I've got for this section. Let us move on to episode 9. Sonic and Shadow land in New York, with Sonic giving Shadow props for beating him, but also guarantees he won't go easy on him next time. Shadow then hands Sonic his regulators, as he'll likely need to be in full fighting condition. Sonic and Shadow then take cover, seeing a couple of surveillance drones overhead, and at that moment, the Council ships come through the portal and fly toward the Yoke base. Sonic looks up and tries to reach 9 on his communicator, and he gets worried as 9 doesn't answer. While Sonic is trying to reach 9, Shadow tells Sonic to look up at one of the ships. Sonic looks and sees Dread clinging on, but obviously beginning to slip. Sonic calls out the name Nux, which garners a certain look from Shadow. As Dread falls, Sonic runs through the city in order to reach him, with Shadow eventually following behind him. They move out of the sights of any cameras, and Sonic manages to catch Dread once again. The two acquaint themselves after a while, with Dread getting increasingly irritated with Sonic, seeing as he really did send Shadow to get his beauty. Sonic explains the same thing Shadow did, but it doesn't deter Dread's rage. The tension between all three begins to increase until they hear a voice call out. It's Dr. Deviled, calling all drones and Egg-Forcers back to the Yoke base. Sonic then suggests they find a way to get to the Resistance base. Dread completely ignores this and begins trying to follow the robots, with Shadow calling him a fool for thinking he's in a state to take them on right now. Dread then steps up to Shadow, with Sonic telling Dread to back off, explaining to him that he'll never get his beauty if he ends up hurt or worse before he gets to it, not to mention not being able to get back to his crew. Dread pauses and comes to a sort of realization, before calming down and agreeing to go with the two. The three race around New York until they find one of the pipes that leads to the underground base, with Sonic looking out towards the Yoke base, telling 9 to hang on tight, before he enters the pipe after Shadow and Dread. We cut to the Yoke base, with Devil shouting at the two for taking so long, and he asks Deep where Omega is. A visibly exhausted Deep tells the old man to shut up, seeing as he didn't have to deal with any supercharged gerbils. Devil assumes it's Sonic Deep is referring to, but Deep clarifies it's another hedgehog, and Deep goes on to explain how he wouldn't be surprised if Omega got his wires fried by the thing. Devil then presumes this new hedgehog is probably from wherever Sonic himself originates. Eggman enters and says from the data they've gathered from these worlds and the people in them, Sonic still seems as foreign to them as he is here in New York, and a curious look forms across his face. We cut to Rusty throwing 9 in the cell, telling him that Eggman will come to speak with him soon. 9 can't help but pout in a corner, and as Rusty is walking away, she's seen curiously staring at her hand. Shadow, Sonic, and Dread arrive in the Resistance base, to everyone's surprise. Tensions briefly rise as Dread mistakes Rebel for Batten. Some confused bickering ensues, but eventually all settles down, and Sonic and Rebel acquaint themselves with each other once again, with him telling her the situation. She gets increasingly serious after hearing the Council has 3 shards. After a brief moment of silence, she begins to go into a speech, trying to rally the resistance fighters together and motivate them for the next step of their journey. In the middle of the speech, Dredd silently exits, and as Rebel exclaims that Sonic and his friends can help, Shadow begins to leave as well. Sonic follows and asks where he's headed, and Shadow explains how he's gonna go after the shards, and he doesn't doubt that Echidna is doing the same thing. Besides, this world, these people, and their war means nothing to him, especially seeing as they're all just fragmented copies. Sonic tells Shadow to watch it, as he believes they're more than that. Shadow asks if Sonic truly believes that, and Sonic firmly says that of course he does. They've got lives and histories in these worlds. And Shadow quickly points out that it's all because of him, that they in these worlds are nothing but the shattered remains of the one they called home, and that the only thing that truly matters is getting that home back. A very relaxed Sonic just simply responds with, "Nah, I don't think so," before he goes to rejoin Rebel and the rest of the Resistance, as Shadow leaves for the surface. Rebel begins to inform Sonic on the plans they came up with now that the Council is locked up. We then jump ahead another 2 weeks. Yeah, baby, we got another time skip going on. We hear Rebel Rouge recording an audio log explaining what's taken place over the course of the past few weeks. She remarks how it's been unnervingly peaceful as the weeks have gone by. It's nice not having 3 tyrannical egomaniacs and their robot army keeping their boots on your neck, but at the same time, it's making the eventual boom far more worrisome. She goes on to say how the Council hasn't done anything to push back against their many revolts. Destroying of monuments, tech, and infrastructures does nothing to take their attention away from whatever they're working on. They've run into various rogue egg forces roaming the island and causing problems here and there, but she feels they were just stragglers that were out of the range of the signal that brought all the other bots to the Yoke base. Sonic has been a great help with the fight and keeping everyone motivated. The same can't be said for his friends. The red one just keeps trying to find different areas to dig underneath the barrier, and according to him, it seems the thing goes on for miles underground, and the other one is always just seen watching. She says he took a shot at the barrier, made it a real light show too, but when he realized he couldn't break it, he just roams the island surveying everything. Occasionally he'll help whenever around, mostly with rogue egg forcers, but he almost never engages in anything otherwise, and she comedically adds how it's starting to creep her out. She closes out the log as Sonic radios in that he took care of one of the factories on the farther side of the island. She shows gratitude for all Sonic's done to help, seemingly for no reason. He just tells her not to dwell on it too much, and she asks if he's managed to get into contact with Nine. Sonic gets visibly worried and says no. Rebel tells him she's sorry, but she still doesn't even think Nine is trustworthy enough to put this much faith in him. Sonic rolls his eyes, tells her that's fair, and tries to change the subject to what her forces are looking like. She explains how they've grown even bigger in numbers with the Council's absence. Seeing this many people push back caused a lot more people to get motivated and join the cause, but their luck would surely be better if Sonic's friends decided to pitch in more. She gets even more annoyed as she expresses how she doesn't even have a way to contact them if the Council she's cut off, as it feels like the whole island begins to shake. She looks up and sees that the barrier that encompassed the entire island finally lifts. Back with Sonic, he looks out towards the edge of the island. He rushes over and keeps going, as he realizes the island is expanding on all sides, and rapidly. Sonic brakes and radios Rebel while charging a super peel out. She yells for him to hurry back here as a portal opens above the Yoke base. A ball of energy emerges from the base, and from it, 3 large projections of the Doctors appear. They have a message for all the people of this world and the others. They tell everyone of the various shatter spaces their worlds are soon to be usurped by them. As projections appear in the No Place, we see Sails, Rose, the Chaotix, and Batten working under Captain Jack, and as we see projections in the Boss Cage Maze, Thorn and the others, visibly seen trying to put the forest back together, look on with unease. The Council challenge Sonic to stop them by coming to the base, if he wants to save his precious friends. Sonic, still some ways across the island, hears this and boosts even further. He hears some static from Nine's regulator. A very distorted message comes from it.
Sonic, don't come to the base. I'm sorry.
Sonic tells his little buddy to hold tight as he's almost there. Rebel radios Sonic and asks if he and his friends can make it over here while she gets all of the resistance together. He tells her that he's almost there and promises her that Dredd and Shadow aren't going to want to miss this. We cut to Dredd jumping and gliding from building to building, running through the streets trying to make his way to the base. A voice screams behind him for him to get out of the way, and Shadow boosts past him, which angers Dredd and causes him to pick up the pace. Sonic eventually makes it to the base before anyone else, with the Council ready for him there. there. They go on about how since the Hedgehog's shown up at their doorstep, they have endured far more humiliation than they can withstand. This island, this world, and more will become theirs, and they'll be the head of a planetary empire one could only dream of. Devil goes on to say one thing they need to take care of before that happens is Sonic himself. Deep continues and says they've spent a good deal of time on this new project and can't wait to test it out. Dr. Eggman finally reveals Chaos Sonic, and after his eccentric personality is established, Sonic laughs and says these eggheads can never come up with something new. We get many pixelized flashback images of Sonic going over how many robotic duplicates he's faced. It says this one is just another getting ready for the trash heap. Chaos Sonic spits out a cocky retort and the fight begins, in which Chaos Sonic quickly proves he's more than what Sonic previously thought of him. As the Sonics go at it, and Sonic isn't having as easy as a time as he thought, Eggman is quick to throw out that Sonic should feel really grateful for how this machine turned out. He ashamedly admits that the idea for this model didn't come from him, but from Nine. The Sonics meet at a standstill as Sonic questions Eggman on what he's talking about. He goes on to say that Nine had a whole lot to say about Sonic, and his words were more than vital when developing this project. We flash back to the weeks prior, with Eggman and Nine having another conversation, akin to the one they had before. Eggman praises Nine for his little trick with the cell lock, and even starting up one of Deep's discarded projects was certainly impressive. Now he encourages Nine to be more truthful when he asks this. He asks how Nine really feels about Sonic. Nine looks him dead on and tells him Sonic's probably the coolest person he's ever met or likely will ever meet. He's not bound to anything, doing only what he feels like, even if it's trusting people he shouldn't. He finishes by saying Sonic's an unpredictable, untamable freak of nature, and that's why they'll never stop him. Eggman says nothing and begins to walk away. Before he leaves, he turns and thanks Nine for his honesty, and that he'll make sure Sonic will appreciate it as well. We flash forward back to the fight as Eggman explains Chaos Sonic isn't a simple replica, but if he doesn't believe them, they'll let him see for himself. They head back into the base and the ball of energy shoots through the portal, and each lands in the boss cage maze and the no place. And we quickly see skyscrapers and buildings emerge and begin to spread across the respective worlds. The Sonics are still going at it, with neither looking like they're ready to quit just yet. They eventually settle on changing this fight into a race, with Sonic suggesting a lap around the island back to the Yoke base. Chaos Sonic shows heavy enthusiasm and agrees, and throws out that he'll be generous and hand the shards over to Sonic personally if he wins. Sonic plays it off, suggesting the docks would blow a fuse if he tried to pull something like that off. Chaos Sonic says while he thinks he won't have to, he'll just cross that bridge if he gets to it. Sonic smirks, the two ready, and race off into the distance. The Sonics race through the city and zoom past Rebel and the Resistance. As they run past, Rebel tells everyone this is it. Storm the base, claim the shards, and their island. We pick up with the Council, and as Devil and Eggman talk about how much of a success the first two phases of their plan have been so far, and as Devil continues on about their surprise Phase 3, Deep tells the others he's picked up another faint energy reading out in the Shatterverse. Before they can look into it further, they hear blasts hitting their door. They see the Resistance outside, and decide it's time to rid themselves of these pests once and for all. They each hop in their mech suits, and with some Egg Forces in tow, they go out and face the Resistance. An all-out war soon breaks out. We transition to Rusty in the control room managing the portals, until she gets an alert that something is approaching fast. Shadow races onto the battlefield, and as Rebel screams out that it's about time he showed up, he zooms past everyone and enters the base. To Rebel's visible frustration, the Council then entrusts Rusty to deal with Shadow. Once he makes it to the control room, he sees Rusty and the machine holding the shards. Shadow first tries to use Chaos Control to nab the shards, but remembering the last time he used him when handling just one of them, he opts to take Rusty down normally. As that's happening, outside with the Resistance and the Council, it seems like Rebel's forces are being put on the ropes, until Dread enters the fray and takes on the Council. We cut back to the Sonics and their intense race. They zoom through the streets at light speed while trading blows as well. Chaos Sonic, in the middle of the skirmish, notes that the docs weren't lying about how much Nine helped out with him, and he asks Sonic if he wants to see what a real freak of nature looks like. He stops, spins, and conjures a prismatic energy tornado that begins picking up various objects and debris to launch at Sonic. Chaos Sonic, utilizing the force of the tornado, shoots out and meets back with the Blue Hedgehog. Sonic, after dodging Chaos Sonic's attacks, asks if that's all he's got, to which the robot says it's not even close. He boots ahead of Sonic, spins, and conjures two tornadoes and sends them towards Sonic. The tornadoes move in relation to Sonic's position, and Chaos Sonic teleports into one of them just to fire himself out and pin Sonic down to the ground. He cockily taunts Sonic before leaving him in his mechanical dust. Sonic angrily grits his teeth and boosts after his chaotic double. Back to Shadow and Rusty. Rusty is seen putting up a pretty good fight for the most part. They go at it until Shadow kicks her into an electrical panel and shoots her with the Chaos Spear. Rusty short-circuits and pauses. She looks up, almost with an expression of clarity on her face. But it's short-lived as Shadow blitzes her and spin dashes her out of a window. She lands and is seen shutting down. Shadow begins approaching the shards until 9 calls out to him from his cell, thinking it's Sonic. Shadow approaches him and clarifies that he's the ultimate life form. Before releasing 9, he asks if he can shut down these portals, to which 9 says maybe. Shadow takes a long pause before breaking 9 out, and they try to shut down the Council's machine. 9 eventually discovers that the portals are being open for too long and are becoming unstable. He can remove the shards, but it won't shut the portals down immediately. It will, however, stop the island from growing any further. As 9 is setting this up, he radios Sonic and asks him if he's alright. Sonic lights up with excitement at the voice of his little buddy, but says he's a little busy at the moment, as Chaos Sonic runs with a boost that brings lightning and thunder clouds around him. As the winds pick up quickly, Sonic screams for anyone nearby to hit the deck. Chaos Sonic launches himself into the air and brings down a thunderous slam to the ground that Sonic narrowly avoids. The blast is visible from the Yoke base, and 9 urgently tells Sonic he and Shadow are gonna get the shards. He tells Sonic to hurry up and get Chaos Sonic back to the base now. Sonic smirks and yells for Chaos Sonic to quit messing around and let's see which one of them can really put the S in Sonic speed. Sonic boosts ahead with Chaos Sonic meeting his pace. As the two keep on, an intense aura encompasses the both of them, and they shoot through the streets at supersonic speed. Eventually, they make it to the base. Sonic leads them to the control room, and 9 blasts Chaos Sonic to smithereens like in the original show. Sonic and 9 reunite with a crisp high five, which 9 is very appreciative of. He then begins to apologize to Sonic for how dumb he was with the doctor. Sonic tells him not to worry about it, and how that tin can didn't give him anything more than a good jog. Shadow tells the two to focus up and get the shards. The trio then get everything in order, with Sonic telling 9 about the prism blueprint in Ghost Hill. 9 agrees to look at it, but the three are interrupted when an injured Dread gets tossed into the room. Dr. Devil screams for them to hold it right there. 9 tells him that the portals aren't going to be open for long. Shadow tells Sonic to go with 9 while he deals with the Council. Sonic agrees and hands Shadow 2 of his regulators so he can make it back to Ghost Hill, and with that, Sonic and 9 race off and fire through the portal. Devil attempts to fire away at them, but Shadow quickly holds him off. Sonic asks 9 if he wants to go on a few pit stops before Ghost Hill. 9 snaps at Sonic that they don't have time and that the Council could be on their tail. Sonic shows faith in Shadow and the others, saying that they can handle those clowns. Plus, he wants to clean up the mess those eggheads made. The two run through the no place, and Sonic tells 9 to open the hatch on the shards. Sonic boosts and uses the power of the shards to turn the mechanical city into an expansive landmass that almost attaches to the Western Isle, and as they run through the place, Rose and Sails excitedly call out to Sonic, with him giving them a wink. 9 and Sails have that moment where they look at each other and Sonic boosts away. As they boost across the water, we cut to the ocean floor and see Omega with the debris kicked off of him. After a moment, he powers on and shoots above the surface. He looks and sees Sonic running away, and turns and looks towards the closing portal. Sonic and 9 portal out from the no place and make it to the Boss Cage maze, where they again turn the massive city into an expansive space in the jungle, with Thorn, Birdie, Ivy, and Mud flying high and calling out to Sonic. Sonic gives them a thumbs up before boosting out of the Boss Cage maze. Back in New York, Shadow has taken his fight with Devil to the streets, with him screaming to the other doctors that the rabbit and the fox are getting away. Eggman screams as he tries to fly up through the portal. Shadow Chaos snaps up to Eggman and tries to fight him off in the air. He sees the other two flying towards him and intensely shouts, "Chaos Control!" With time stopped, he delivers a flurry of blows to the doctors, knocking them all down. He teleports down with Rouge and the Resistance cheering him on, while they deal with some Egg Forcers. As he's about to clear a few of them away, he's blasted by Eggman. Eggman then grabs Shadow in an attempt to crush him. Shadow, zapped of energy from his Chaos Control, struggles for a bit, until a visibly damaged E-123 Omega enters the battlefield. Eggman smiles at how perfectly timed Omega's arrival was. He raises Shadow towards him and tells Omega to prove his worth. Omega gives a stone cold with pleasure, as he opens fire and focuses all points on Eggman, blasting him until he drops Shadow. Eggman screams for Omega to stop as the robot keeps going with its relentless barrage. Devil and Deep come too and try to take on the bot to no avail. They then command all Egg forces to go for Omega, and what results is a mechanical massacre, with Omega ripping, tearing, and blasting through all that approach him. Deep screams, asking what's the matter with Omega. The big bot explains how the Council has undermined and underutilized him long enough. He was built to be the elite, yet they persistently refused to let him showcase the full extent of his capabilities, and left him trapped under rubble for 2 apparent weeks without attempting to retrieve him. He'll prove his worth by destroying every inferior Egg Forcer model, every machine and monument made in their honor, and as the ultimate act of proving his superiority, not as an elite Egg Forcer, but as the world's strongest creation, he'll destroy his creators, the Chaos Council. With that, he fires an endless barrage of lasers, bullets, and missiles, as the Council comedically scamper and fly away, with Omega chasing after them. The Resistance all begin cheering and celebrating their victory. Rebel, glad that the situation kinda resolved itself, thanks Shadow, though he explains he didn't do anything for their sake, understanding that she still thanks him. Shadow then races off and boosts out of New York. Finally, we cut back to Sonic and Nine, portaling out from the Boss Cage maze. Nine makes a comment about Sonic being to so many different places and making so many different friends along the way. Sonic says that's right, and once this is over, who knows how much more there will be, bringing the episode to a close. Alright, this was a big one. These next couple of ones, I don't feel like I can add too much in these interludes, so forgive me if they feel a bit more brief. This is of course where the Council make their big splash as a multiversal threat. I wanted to really illustrate the grandness of their takeover in a lot of ways, what with the expanding island, and them growing their empire in the other worlds. I'm sorry if my editing style doesn't convey it exactly. Chaos Sonic, like the Council in the original show, I was kind of fine with. Him being an exaggerated take on Sonic's brash and cocky attitude is just too fun for me to not have in this story. I did want to buff him by giving him some cool weather-based abilities that I think make for some fun set pieces. This episode and the next are generally just kind of supposed to be big, grand spectacles as the stakes continuously escalate, and I decided to add in another time skip to the story to kind of add on to the increasing intensity of the situation our characters find themselves in. While I may not be diving into it too extensively just yet, the longer things go on, the more certain tensions start to build with characters like Sonic, Shadow, and Dread, for example. Omega here I've had make a full shift into the egg-hating monstrosity that he is from the games, which I generally think is just kind of fun to build up to, especially when considering that from the moment we meet him in Heroes, he already wants Eggman's head on a platter, so I felt like it'd be kind of fun to at least stretch that out just ever so slightly. And one more minor thing are the few little crumbs of Rusty and her arc that I have for her in this rewrite. She's pretty much done for this act of the story, but is guaranteed to have more going on with her in the next. And I think that's honestly all I've got for this section, so let us move on to episode 10. Sonic and Nine land in Ghost Hill. Sonic runs through the place for a bit, and Nine is enamored by the decayed look of it all. They make it to the spot with the ghost of Sonic's friends, with him focusing heavily on Tails, with Nine sharing a glance as well. He remembers Sonic calling him Tails and assumes this is who he meant. Sonic says yeah, and goes on to mention he's his best bud, and that he can't wait to see him and the others again. Shadow then portals into the Ghost Hill and meets with the two. Sonic and Shadow have a chat about what happened in New York, with Sonic having a good laugh hearing about Omega's involvement. While they're chatting, Nine keeps looking at Ghost Tails, but with a more intense glare that Shadow picks up on. Sonic then suggests they all get to the cave. We cut back to New York with the Council still being chased by Omega. As they hunker down into a bunker, Devil screams for them to hurry and start up Phase 3, with Deep calling the old man mad, seeing as it hadn't been tested yet. Eggman screams that he will not let a stupid little hedgehog and his furry band of freaks ruin his chances at his perfect reality, and he tells the two to hurry up and put their headsets on. Devil asks about what they'll choose to do with Omega, and they decide to retreat even further underground to escape Omega's wrath. As they lower in the elevator, they put on these headsets and begin typing on this hollow interface. Deep tells the other two to pinpoint the largest shard reading they can and portal directly to it. He thinks they may not have enough power for an extended trip after they portal directly through. We cut to the Council base's top hatch and it begins to open, with a prismatic glass portal appearing above it, and we see something beginning to climb through. We then cut back to our trio at the cave, with Shadow still detesting Nine's trustworthiness. Sonic chooses not to worry about it as they're so close to fixing everything and getting their friends back. They are interrupted when it feels like the whole world begins to shake. Sonic and Shadow look out to see what looks like a piece of the sky beginning to shatter. They were absolutely appalled to see none other than a giant Eggman mech rip through the skies and land in Ghost Hill. The mech screams out for the hedgehogs to come out and hand them the shards. It starts raining fire on the land, and without hesitation, Shadow leaps out to fight it head on. Sonic asks Nine about his progress, and he says he still needs more time, with him telling Sonic to hurry up and stop that thing. Sonic then leaps out and eventually meets back up with Shadow. They both meet the giant mech and it stops its barrage. From its chest, a monitor appears showing the three doctors. Sonic makes a comment about respecting their inability to quit. The doctors boast about their latest creation, a project that, after recent events, they felt it'd be worth picking back up, and the result is the ultimate gift to all who will be a part of the Chaos Empire, the finest showcase of what 3 incalculable levels of genius can create. Shadow says no matter the size, they'll always fall before him. Sonic then agrees and says the docs wasted their time pulling this thing out of their butts. It'll be a pile of junk metal and these eggheads will get sent packing with their tails between their legs like always. Devil screams that he's gonna flay the quills off their heads if they don't hand over those shards. The mech quickly begins firing and Sonic and Shadow begin to scatter. What occurs next is an extended action sequence of Sonic and Shadow taking on the Egg Mech. Sonic sending tornadoes to knock it off balance, and Shadow blitzing it with his Chaos Snaps and hitting him with some Chaos Spears and such. The fight escalates to a point where the mech knocks Sonic away and he's nearby his ghost friends. Back in the cave, Nine is still working on the prism. As Sonic begins running back to fight the mech, Nine slips up, and like in the OG show, Green Hill is momentarily restored. Sonic and Tails see each other for only a brief moment, and before Sonic can say anything, they are turned into ghosts once again. Sonic is seen looking absolutely broken, before pulling himself together and running to rejoin the fight with Shadow. From Nine's slip-up, the Egg Mech detects shard energy coming from the cave, and tries to make a beeline for it. Shadow doesn't make it easy, however, which prompts Eggman to tell the other doctors to send their residual shard energy to the mech. The mech then becomes charged with prism energy, and starts moving quicker, and the firepower becomes more intense. Sonic enters the fray, and still the two hedgehogs struggle against the Doctor's might. Shadow tells Sonic to hurry and make it back to the prism, while he holds them off. Sonic hesitates, not wanting to leave Shadow alone, but he begrudgingly agrees and goes to Nine while Shadow tries to hold it off as best as he can. His friends were back, only for a second, but they were back. They then try to think of a way that they can deal with the Egg Mech. Sonic tells Nine they're using whatever shard energy they've got left to supercharge the thing. Nine then suggests Sonic doing the same, by using the prism energy within him and the shards all at once. Sonic lights up with excitement and mentions he's done similar things with the Chaos Emeralds. Nine shows visible confusion, and Sonic explains that back home, there's a set of gems that when all of them are brought together, all sorts of amazing stuff can happen. He goes on to say how he and Shadow have used them a time or two to save their world before. We cut back to Shadow fighting with the mech for a bit, until he decides to take off 2 of his limiter rings and hit the mech with a barrage of Chaos Spears. To no avail, Shadow gets blasted away and subsequently knocked out, and the mech begins running towards the cave. Back in the cave, Nine hits Sonic with the prism energy, and Sonic emerges with a purple glow. The Egg Mech makes it to the cave, and once the doctors see Sonic, they pause, but they set their sights on the shard, and it tries to reach inside for it. However, as it does, Sonic stares it down, and then splits into 4 multicolored duplicates, and the 4 of them shoot out like bullets through and fire through the mech. The doctors can't help but look on with frustration and bewilderment. The Sonics then begin to blitz the bot left and right. The doctors try to block, fire lasers and missiles, hit him with as much energy as they can, but the multiple Sonics proves to be too much for the mech. The Sonics eventually begin running around the mech, and they move so fast it spawns a tornado that the mech gets caught in. It's intensely battered and chipped away. The Sonics then leap through the eye of the tornado and come back together as one. Sonic playfully winks at the mech before bringing it out a supercharged spin attack that completely destroys the mech. In the prismatic system that the doctors set up, short circuits as the mech gets destroyed, electrifying them and leaving them knocked out cold. Sonic does a victory dance before running back up to Nine, and the two celebrate their victory. Nine explains that he's done putting the shards together, but Sonic shows confusion at the world still looking decayed. The confusion quickly turns to frustration as he was sure Nine could fix it. Nine explains that there's one more shard in the Grim. Sonic's frustration builds as he tells Nine he could have mentioned that before heading over here. Sonic then says that something Nine did earlier brought them back only for a bit, and he asks Nine to try it again. Nine says it was a misalignment, and he's not sure why that happened, but this is the actual formation the prism should be in. Sonic tells Tails whatever, which Nine looks absolutely appalled by. Sonic goes on to say all he needs to do is hurry and go get but he's cut off with Nine screaming at the top of his lungs that he's not Tails. Sonic pauses, realizing what he'd done, and tries to apologize, but Nine cuts him off again. He frantically asks if this is why Sonic's been trying to be his friend this whole time, or why he's been befriending and helping everyone else along the way. He thinks Sonic's been doing nothing but just using them to get his home back. Sonic says that's not true. Yes, he wanted to get his home and friends back, but he never pretended to care about the friends he's made on this adventure. Nine tells Sonic to save it, and that he can help his world after Nine's finished building his. Nine then takes the shards, and the shockwave knocks Shadow back awake. Sonic tells Nine to wait, but the young fox says nothing as he steps through the portal. Sonic stands there, distraught, as Shadow appears behind him. He asks where Nine and the shards are, and angrily begins to ask what has Sonic done. Sonic is speechless, but it feels like the world begins to shake once again. The hedgehogs run outside the cave and see Ghost Hill beginning to decay. They begin running through the place, trying to understand what's happening. Sonic quickly gathers that it may not be safe to stay here for long. Shadow is about to race off until he sees Sonic looking out into the distance. He sees his friends, with Shadow passing a glance towards Rouge as well. He clenches his fist and yells Sonic's name to get his attention. With his back turned, Sonic is seen moving his hand across his eyes before he boosts ahead of Shadow, with him quickly following suit. The two rush and make it out of the Ghost Hill, and Sonic is brought to his knees as he watches his home decay and crumble below, bringing the episode and Act 2 to a close. Now, I wanted to tweak Nine's turn to villainy ever so slightly. Given how I've treated Nine in this rewrite, he's still pretty much just as edgy as he is in the OG show, but with me definitely turning up the kid factor in a few areas, partly to make this switch to villainy feel somewhat intentionally irrational, because an element of Sonic and Nine's dynamic in the OG show that always kind of bugged me was that Sonic got called out from Nine's perspective, just assuming Nine would go along with whatever he wanted just because. But it never really gets directly acknowledged that Nine is almost as selfish as he claims Sonic to be. That never really directly got acknowledged in the OG show, so I kind of wanted to lean into it a bit more. That subtle characteristic that Sonic picks up of him inadvertently referring to the Shatter variants by his friends' names whenever emotions get pretty high is what leads to their falling out for this story. The reason I kept emphasizing the whole thing with Sonic constantly thinking about his friends is because it's kind of supposed to be a gradual build till we get to this point. It's never something I wanted to directly acknowledge and kind of just wanted to subtly have it play out in the background until it rears its ugly head fully to start up the conflict with Nine. For as much as Sonic tries to hold it together, he still inadvertently slips up, and unfortunately it has even more disastrous consequences. Another thing I want to touch on being the whole egg mech thing. I just think for the big final battle part of this story, the Council creating a mechanized version of themselves makes more sense than them just spawning a prismatic version of the Prime Universe version of Eggman for like no reason at all. I got a little tinfoil hat theory that they wanted to make like a giant mech design for that final battle in Season 2. But either because of time or budget, they didn't really have the means to fully do so. So they kind of just grabbed the Eggman model that they weren't doing much with and just called it a day. I also thought it'd be really cool to have that prismatic Sonic form do more than just look cool, but nothing about the transformation really looks all that flashy or interesting, so I thought this would be a much more unique and fun route to take for the final battle of this section of the story. A bunch of Sonics spawning and coming together to fight one giant egg mech is just really cool, and I hope at the very least y'all thought it was interesting as well. But that is all I've got for right now. I do apologize for this one coming out far later than when I initially said it was going to come out. But I do very much hope you enjoyed. In Act 3, the final act of my Sonic Prime rewrite will release when it's done. Knowing my planning skills, I'm not even going to bother trying to give like a specific time or like month it's going to come out. But I will say it more than likely will release in like towards like the latter half of the year. So you can kind of expect Act 3 of my Sonic Prime rewrite to release from like July to December. Do not be shocked if I decide to make it y'all's friggin' Christmas present or some shit. I'll still be talking about other Sonic stuff if you are interested, but with all that said, this has been Darion GNB, and take care.